Hello everyone, I'm Professor Toybox. I've got Princess Jasmine with me, and today I'm putting the finishing touches on my Agrabah toy box. I've already moved most of the creativity toys below the terrain, and the question becomes what to do with these two buttons. I still need to edit this toy box, so I can't get rid of them because I need to be able to turn the economy system on and off. But I don't really want them sitting here because it's kind of ugly just having them sit out here, and it invites the player to push them. So what I'm going to do is set up a hidden command center, and we'll move the buttons there. And so we're going to come back out over here to the starting pad. And I'm going to drop down below the terrain, and we're going to put a piece of terrain down here. Like that. And then we'll move the buttons over here to this piece of terrain. And that way we still have our buttons, and they're close to where we first come in the toy box. Let's grab this one first. This is the one that deactivates everything. And it's probably a good idea to place them in the same relative position that I had them, so I can remember which button is which. And this little command center is going to be kind of far from where I had these set up, so it'll take a moment to move them. And we'll put this one here, and the logic connections are still there, so that's good. We'll come back over here and grab the other button, and that gets them out of the way. And again, the player isn't going to be tempted to push them and cause problems. Most of the time the player is probably going to be me, but I have guests over to the house occasionally, and they like to play through some of my recent toy box creations. So it's kind of good to do this cleanup step, and then I can let them play and do what they like. There we are. And so now when I come into the toy box and I appear here on the pad, if I'm wanting to do some editing or whatever, all I have to do is come into Spark mode and drop below the terrain, and here's the buttons that we need in order to do what we need to do. Oh, accept it. Put me up here. Sometimes it does that. Let's see if I can get out from under that arch. There we go. So being underneath the archway was what caused the problem. But anyhow, I can come over here now and turn these off. The other thing is I can always grab the flying carpet too if that's a problem, and pop that power disc down and use the flying carpet to get under here. So that's okay. All right, now that we have this command center, this becomes the perfect location to place the toy box door that leads to the palace dungeons. And so we'll come down and grab that. And I'm going to try to keep the same relative positions for these. And you'll see what I mean after we get all the other toy box doors in later in this series. But for this one, I'm going to drop it right here. And eventually I'll put the toy box door for the palace interior there, and the one for the desert out over here. And so this way, I can go to that toy box whenever I want without first having to play through this one. And that'll be a really good thing because I'm going to have to travel there a lot while I'm building it. So we'll come into the properties for this, and for the destination, we're going to create a new toy box. And it's going to be an empty toy box. And for the level name, it's going to take me a moment to type this in. But I'm going to set this to be Palace Dungeon. And I think just one. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we are. And so that'll be the name of that level, the second toy box in the series. And we'll do a save. That creates the toy box and links it to this door. And then these properties are fine. And so if I want to get to that toy box now, all I have to do is just drop down off this starting pad, come down here, and I can go right through that toy box door to my palace dungeon and start working on it. Now obviously this isn't the way the player is going to get there. They need to come through and collect the coins and get the gate from the guard, or get the gate key from the guard, and then unlock the gate. And so in order to go through that toy box door, we're going to need to set up a trigger area. And we want to set it up just inside this gate, because I want to make sure the player doesn't trigger this just by walking past the front of the gate. And I need this to stretch the entire width of that opening. So we'll move that over there like that. Oops. And the fact that the trigger area extends in behind into the solid mass of the building doesn't really matter. Okay, so around the trigger area we'll do a new logic connection. When entered by player any, we'll come over to our toy box door over in the command center and connect to that. And we'll say change the level. And so that's how the player will actually get there when they're playing through the game. But again, the toy box door itself is down in the command center, so I don't have to worry about trying to unlock this gate to get to that door. That's why we're using a trigger area back here rather than putting the door directly behind here. Now one thing, that white wall kind of looks a little out of place. And so I'm going to come down to the blocks drawer, and I'm going to put this little short wall in here. And we're going to stack up a few of these. And I'm going to change the texture on this. I want something very dark. And fortunately this blacktop texture works fairly well. Set that to be my theme. It'll update any day now. There it goes. And then we're going to put a few of these across the back. Now that looks like a hole that's going into the palace wall. So that looks pretty good. And that gives the impression that that actually goes somewhere. So I like that. Alright, so we have the door set up now for the next toy box, which we're going to look at next time. Let's go ahead and set up the enemy generators. And before we can actually do that, we have to set up Zone 3, because we haven't done that yet. And Zone 3 is here in the palace grounds. So I'm going to drop a locator right in the center of the palace grounds, which is going to be right underneath the palace itself. And that's going to put us about right here. And whether it's here or here is okay, doesn't quite matter. If you want to air any, you want to go forward more. So we'll just drop it here. And this will be the center of Zone 3. And we're going to set up a dynamic trigger around that locator. And I've already dropped one out here to save a little bit of time. So we're going to connect up to that locator with a new locator connection. There we are. And then we'll set the properties on this so that the target is the connected locator. And the trigger distance, I'm going to set this to be 120, which is going to be 30 blocks. And I've already measured this out, and that will extend out just past this gate for the palace. And so as we start entering the palace, that gives the enemy wave generators that we're going to hook up time to create all of the guards. And so now that's ready to go. And now we'll set up the enemy wave generators to add the guards. And to save time, I've already dropped the enemy wave generator here and a bunch of locators all over the palace grounds. I've got 2 of them out here. I've got 2 of them over here. I've put 1 back here by the trees. We've put 2 of them up here on the palace wall, and another 2 on the other side, kind of mirroring the ones on the left there. And I've already hooked up most of them, except for this one here to the left. And to do that, all you have to do is the new locator connection, like that. And I've done that for all of those locators. And then to save a little bit of time, I've also, oh no, I haven't configured the wave. Okay. Forgot to do that, but that's all right. This won't take long. Scroll down to the bottom and pick up the Agrabah guard. And I'm going to set the count to be 5. And under the properties, we'll put them at random locators and take the generation delay to 0. And then we'll connect up to the dynamic locator for zone 3 and do a new logic connection when entered by player any. Come over to the enemy wave generator and generate the wave. And on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when exited by player any. Come over to the enemy wave generator and defeat the wave. And that will take the enemies out if the player isn't anywhere near this area, which will save memory. And that's a really good thing because when you look at the memory count, it's getting up there pretty full. So I want to make sure I'm not leaving a lot of enemies around in parts of the toy box where the player's not even anywhere near here. And if you have 2 players, again, in my household, usually the 2 players stick somewhat close together when they're playing through a level. And so if one of them leaves the area, most likely both of them are. And so taking the enemies out usually won't be a problem. Of course, if one of the players lingers, then that might look a little weird having the enemies vanish on them, but I think that's a small price to pay to save some memory. And now you're going to do the exact same thing, creating an enemy wave generator for zone 1 and zone 2. And I've already done that to save a little bit of time. So this is already hooked up to that dynamic locator there for zone 1. And it's configured the exact same way with 5 Agrabah guards at random locators and no generation delay. And I've hooked them up to locators all over this area, including some of them that I've reused from the monkey side quest. No point in letting locators go to waste, especially when we're low on memory. But I've also added a few others. I put one over here. I put one out here on this street, which is parallel to the palace wall. And I added one over here and one on that little alley. I added one over here in the marketplace. And I put one out over this way on this little street. And those are all connected up to that enemy wave generator for zone 1. And again, it's connected to the dynamic trigger for zone 1 the exact same way we just did for zone 3. And then over in zone 2, I've set up a couple of locators here on this street and one over here, one over by the manure pile, and then a number of them over in this bazaar. And we've already dropped the enemy wave generator that connects to those, just like you see there, and the one down there at the end of the street. This is configured the same way as the other 2, and it's connected up to the dynamic trigger for zone 2 in the exact same way. And so now we can take all of these creativity toys, now that we're done hooking them up, and move them all below the terrain and get them out of the way. And moving them below the terrain preserves the logic connections, so that's really good. We're not going to lose any logic connections. We'll drop this one below. And this one. And the same thing with zone 1 over here. And that cleans it up because you don't want to leave these laying around. It just looks ugly. So we'll move them out of the way, and then the player never has to see them. All they need to do is just enjoy the wonderful scenery and play through. They don't have to see the ugliness that went into building this. And there we are. So now at this point we can come over here and save our game, which I'll do that offline, but we'll come back to the starting pad and save the game. We're good to go. So at this point, I think we've done everything we can in this toy box. We still have 2 more toy box doors to add for the desert and the palace interior, but I'll add those later when we talk about the satellite receiver. Next time, I'll show you the completed Palace Dungeon toy box, and I'll play through it so you can get a good look at it. The Palace Dungeon is the second of 5 toy boxes in this adventure, and it's based on the Disney Infinity 4.0 alpha footage that aired last year. It's a fun toy box, and I'm eager to show it off. If you haven't signed up on my blog or subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you do that so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, take care.